with that, it's something you see a lot with Bungie's communications recently. Is they talk a lot about pretty much like how they talk about the pretty much return on investment. Like, is this worth the resources? Because as we know, they have a lot of developers, but clearly most of them aren't working on Destiny. They definitely aren't as many working on Destiny as they used to. So, and that's been definitely kind of I think it's taken a bit of adjustment for, I think, a lot of players, because Bungie definitely, in the players' defense, Bungie were not very transparent about how much they were shifting their developers towards other games. So, like, and we'll probably talk about it later, but the PvP is a classic example. PvP clearly looked underdeveloped for a very long time, and players are like, what's going on with Crucible? Why is there no updates? Why are they not? Why does it seem like Bungie doesn't care much about Crucible? And then we pretty much had to force out of them. Then Bungie said in the state of the game how basically we don't have the resources to do that, and we don't. And they said, oh, well, now we're going to have a strike team, a dedicated strike team to work on Crucible, which is like, I guess in their eyes seemed as like good news, but in the players' eyes it was like, well, hang on, you've now made a strike team for Crucible? Like, what happened to the original Crucible team? Like, they never properly announced that they were moving all these developers away from Destiny, but then they announced when they're bringing them back, and it kind of like, well, hang on, since when was there not a Crucible team? So why did it take this much for you to have to make a strike team to then put some resources into Crucible? We thought it was always like that. But again, I can see both sides, but Bungie definitely weren't transparent about, and again, it sounds like, kind of entitled consumerism, kind of like, why aren't you telling me about your development process? But Bungie definitely they seem surprised by the community surprise that there weren't loads of developers still working on.
And see, this is the thing, right? Because I think it is a bit of give and take. Like, absolutely, there is a little bit of a demanding side to this.
For sure.
But by that same token, there's also a lot of Bungie having just not listened on that front for a long time. And maybe that is a bit harsh, because not listening and not doing something aren't the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not listening to something and listening and just not being able to do something is something like that. I think it's just, it got to that moment where it was a boiling point. The PvP community was fed up. And I think it also was that the sort of crossing of a Rubicon, where people sat there and were like, look, listen, we know you guys don't think that PvP is worth the investment, but here are some numbers. Like, almost half the player base plays the Crucible on a regular basis. If you're disregarding them so consistently, they will just take their ball and go somewhere else. It's not impossible. There are lots of good multiplayer games out there. I mean, we talked about Warzone and everything else going on, but Apex still exists out there. Everything to do with other games that are big in a multiplayer sense still out there, hasn't gone anywhere. I mean, even if you want to just reach for a big name out there, you're looking at competition from something like Fortnite even. So let's be real for a second. Bungie is in this place where they weren't necessarily responding to what I think was very valid player criticism for a very long time. And that's, it's for a PvP player out there like Grenada Jake, I imagine that it's one of those things of sitting there and being like, yeah, I've been trying to say that for years, man. It's definitely frustrating. I think it's good that there's a strike team now, but it does reveal that there was some deficiencies with the way that Bungie was approaching how PvP content was served. Even Joe in the thing said it has been underserved. In his 15-minute Twitter video, if I'm not mistaken, he did say that it is underserved. I hope I'm not getting that wrong, because
he
believe I remember
pretty
that.
Much along those lines, and he reiterated it in the state of the game, and that was the gist of it. I'm not sure verbatim, but you raised a very good point about there's a difference between not doing something, them not doing something because they aren't able to, and them not doing something because they don't want to. Like with Crucible is a perfect example of, a lot of players saw it as like, is Bungie incompetent? Do they not know that Crucible is underserved and that needs his attention? Are they trying? Like, a lot of people saw it as if, and I could tell by just a lot of the way people talk about Crucible, they used to talk about it in the sense of, like, why isn't Bungie doing anything about Crucible? Do they not know? Like, are they incompetent? Are they trying but failing? But it's actually not that at all. It's more of the case of they very much are aware, but they made the decision a long time ago. Again, not saying I agree with this, just explaining what the situation was. But they made the decision a long time ago to shift developers. Clearly, the majority of Crucible developers are working on Marathon and their other PvP-ish games. But this wasn't Bungie underserving Crucible because they're just useless and don't know what to do. They were very consciously aware, like, no, we're aware that the Crucible is the way it is, and we're doing the most that we want to do. They're not doing it because they're incapable. Bungie is very capable studio. If they wanted to divert their entire workforce onto just Destiny, it would be a completely different game. But the reason they're not doing it is because they are just prioritizing, okay, we want to work on Marathon, we want to work on this area of Destiny, we want to take developers away from, a lot of it is take developers away from the content that, Crucible doesn't make much money. That's also another harsh truth about Destiny, is that it's free to play. The majority of players who play it are free to play. There isn't a lot of, even making maps, there's not money you can make off of that stuff, whereas the PvE side of things, there's lots of money to be made there. There is these season passes, there are missions, there are obviously microtransactions. So it's kind of like a case of them just diverting resources away. But yeah, it wasn't Bungie's to cap on this. Bungie's lack of development on Crucible was definitely deliberate. It wasn't like an accidental, oh, we're trying, but we just don't know what to do. It was a very deliberate, like, no, we are just going to leave this mode kind of as it is, do some tweaks, do some fixes. And then once there was a huge fuss about it, rightfully so, now they've said, okay, we're going to make a strike team and actually address some of these pain points for Crucible.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to go too far back to the state of the game that was released, because that was very much the topic of our last creator chat. But man, I still remember, as far as the sentiment for the community PvP side in particular was concerned, I think that's the lowest low we've had in years. It's the Crucible has always been quietly kind of discontent, except for a few moments of levity, kind of like around the 30th anniversary update and a few other times. But man, it's, yeah, I can't remember a more frustrating time for PvP content creators than that, And you can tell because it bleeds into the rest of the game too. When the PvPers are upset, they make a lot of noise, and everyone else can hear it. I hear it, and I'm the lore guy. I barely touch the Crucible, but if someone is mad about it, I'm going to hear about it, because it's all my Twitter feed will be for a while. And I'll just sit there and be like, well, I'm just over here enjoying my lore and my PvE, but yeah, the people in Shax's realm of things are mad, so I know about that now. And it's, I don't even want to say that it's just about the optics or the communication side of things, because it is important in other aspects, right? Like, this is a general point of player communication that sometimes gets missed as far as the mark is concerned. So, it just based on purely the idea of understanding where player sentiment is and understanding what your players want out of your game, it is important to get that right, There
was also something that aligns with everything we've just talked about. I'm pretty sure it was the PC Gamer article where Joe talked about Bungie's kind of intentions and the general sentiment around Crucible. And he said, I remember specifically saying how since 2020, Bungie seemed unsure and kind of uninterested in the future of PvP. He said that he was, as he became the game director, he was asking and wondering what's going on with PvP. And he said that he got the sense that Bungie pretty much wasn't too interested or concerned about investing in the future of PvP. And it was kind of, he didn't say, I'm putting words in his mouth, he didn't say it was a lost cause, but that was the gist of what he was saying, is that Bungie doesn't seem too interested, and that he then tried to rearrange some things and make sure there was more effort put into PvP. But I remember him saying also how he said, or I think Bungie seemed to come to the conclusions that no other game developers are able to maintain both PvP and PvE at the same time. It seems that they'd kind of analyzed the market and been like, you know what, games don't seem to be able to maintain both PvP and PvE, so we're just going to try and make PvP as good as it can be, and it'll always be there as a way to mess around with weapons and take weapons that you've earned from the raid and see how they are in the Crucible and Trials. But essentially that PvP is not and won't be the priority, and that they're going to lean more into the PvE side of things. But the gist was him saying that he got the feeling when he first became the game director that Bungie didn't seem too interested in Crucible, and that he was going to try and fix that and change that, or do it as much as they can. But again, if Bungie, if the leadership and higher ups have decided PvP is not worth all our investment, then there's only so much that individuals can do, or even any amounts of tweets can do.
Which I'm going to go ahead and say, I think is completely off base. And I say that, and it's kind of a tragedy because they are the living, breathing proof that you can have really great PvP alongside really great PvE. And they did it in Destiny 1, you know? Destiny 2's early life cycle, too, had what I would consider bad PvP at the start, but when Forsaken came around and eventually there was kind of this meridian where things kind of smoothed themselves out around about Season of Opulence, yeah, people were really into the PvP at that point. Like, it was a good time to be playing in the Crucible. I would sit there and honestly say that they are the living, breathing proof that it's possible. I think it's only when you take a look at something like, say, Overwatch 2, where developers aren't experienced at delivering content at that pace, where they have to pick and choose. Bungie has that experience as far as the live service industry is concerned. They are the veterans. They are the standing stone that allows everything else to sort of orbit, you know?
Yeah, the only example. So I think that was kind of what he was getting at, in just the sense that they looked around and said, you know what, no, we're pretty much the only game that is even doing or trying to do this both hybrid of PvP and PvE. So is there even much point? Should we just lean into one and just kind of, are we operating the most kind of efficient we can if we're still trying to do something that no other games seem to be able to do? But yeah, it was interesting when he said that. It was a very in-depth article where he talked and Joe's done a very good job at communicating a lot of things. And even the video that he made in response to obviously the state of the game, which wasn't very well received. His video was very impressive, especially for developers who aren't content creators, who aren't public speakers. It's